This is part 3 of the Worksheet 13 companion video. This should be the last video in the series, I'm hoping. And we're going to tackle the last practice question, practice 6, in this video. We're going to go pretty deep into this question, and we're going to make a really fun, very solid version of this. So first thing I'm going to do is show what I did in Unity to get started with this, because I have the UI already done and in place. But this is going to be an extremely useful video, demo for your project this week. So make sure that you do follow along with this one and do actually do this one, because it correlates directly to your project. So if we kind of read the description of we read the question, it says to create a program that randomly generates character stats for up to 6 characters. We're pretending that we're making this for like an RPG or something like that. Use an input field to allow a user to put in the names of a character, and the name must be 6 characters long exactly. Have a button that generates stats for all entered characters. Use a 1D array for the names, but a 2D array for the stats. Practice displaying all the information to the screen in an efficient way. So not only are we working with a 2D array, we're also working with a parallel array, because the 1D array is going to be parallel to that 2D array. So we're going to have a lot of data that we're going to be managing with this one. So let me show you what I've already done in Unity so that you can catch up with this. Pause the video once I go over it so that you can do it too. I did make mine really nice looking, and if you really don't want to go through the effort of like making the panels and the extra stuff, that's fine. But I'm going to hit the highlights of things that I'm going to be manipulating in the code so that you can make sure that you have it too. So up here, this is where I'm going to be displaying the names, and when I generate the stats. And I have a names text, an HP text, an MP text, an ST text, and a DF text for hit points, magic points, strength, and defense. It's a very basic RPG, but it's enough to get us started with that. And this is going to store the names of any entered players. Down here, I have a name input. This is an input field. I have a submit button for submitting a name, and I have a generate button so that when we click it, we can generate stats for our inputted players. And the last thing we do have is this error text. And we're going to use this to give the player a warning if what they input for their name is incorrect. Because remember, it has to be exactly 6 characters long. So if it's less than 6 characters, it's not going to be taken. If it's more than 6 characters, it's not going to be taken. We also, with this, want to make sure that after we enter 6 players, that we can no longer submit, because we really wouldn't want to, our array is only going to be 6 long, so if we try to enter a 7th player, we're going to get an error with that. So we're going to make sure that we are being really good with our coding in this one. It's going to be really good practice since we didn't do it in the previous one. So the other thing I do have is I did make my game controller empty, like an empty game object renamed it game controller, and I made a new script for this one. Please don't work in your gradebook or worksheet. Just make a new script so we can start fresh, called RPG. I did make this in a new script. I'm sorry, a new scene, so that we're just kind of starting fresh. So hopefully you can take the opportunity to pause, get this ready to go, and then we're going to jump into it. So actually, the first thing I'm going to do is, since this is getting a little bit complex, we should probably plan this out before we jump in and start to code. So I'm actually going to make a new, let's see if I can clear this out from last time. We're going to plan it out in Photoshop. Normally this would be something that you'd probably want to do on paper, but since you can't see what I'm doing, Photoshop will do a good job for that. And this way we can kind of get our thoughts before we actually jump into Visual Studio, so that we try to make sure that we don't forget anything. We try to figure out any problems before we actually need to encounter them in code. And it'll go a lot faster when we get to coding than just trying to code it outright. This is the method that you should be going through yourself anyway, where you are planning this out before you try to code. So first things first, we do need to make sure we think about any extra usings that we need at the top. And I know we're going to have to add the UI one, since we're going to be manipulating UI. We're not doing any scene reloading. I guess we could have like a reset button that would reload our scene. That would be probably pretty nice, but we're not going to deal with that. But it's good to note that we do need to remember to using our unity.ui. And I'm going to be doing a lot of shorthand in here, so I'm not actually writing real code. I'm just writing pseudocode so that I remember to myself what I'm going to need. We also need to think of what class level variables are we going to need. And I can do that kind of down here. I can start thinking about that. We're going to need, for class level variables, we're going to need our UI elements. And that's going to be like our text objects we want to manipulate. It's going to be our input field. I don't know why this is acting up. And we do want to, do we want to include our buttons? We probably want to have our submit button in there, so that we can turn it off once we have 6 people in there, and we have to include that in there. What other class level variables are we going to need? We are going to, if we think back to what we did for our gradebook, we probably want to keep all of our arrays at class level, since we're going to be needing access to them throughout the code, and we don't want to scope them to a specific function, or else it's going to be really difficult to access them. So we're going to need our name array, and that's going to be a string. We're going to need an int for our stat array. I think my Wacom is wearing out. I don't know how much longer my Wacom tablet's going to last. And this is going to be a 2D if we want to make a note of these. So like this is going to be a 6. And this is going to be a 6 with, if we look, we're having, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's going to be a 6 by 4. And there's one other thing I can think of right now, and we might come back and make changes. Like we can always come back and add to this. It's not like this is set in stone yet. That's like the beauty of doing it this way, is we're kind of thinking through this, and then we can alter this as we go. We probably want to, just like the gradebook, have a counter so we can keep track of how many people we have in, how many characters have we added to our array. Because we're not necessarily limiting the players to having to add all 6 characters. What if they only want 2 characters, and we would only then want to generate stats for 2 characters? We also want to keep track of how many are entered so that we can make sure we turn that button off if we do hit 6. So we're going to have an int counter. So that we can keep track of the number of players that we have. And I think that's pretty good. I can't think of anything else off the top. Oh, okay. We do have one more thing we need to keep, and or think about. And I'll explain this in more detail later when it actually comes to utilizing it. But I want to make a note of this so that we don't forget it. We're going to have an array of text objects. And we're going to call this one, we'll call it just text array. And I'm going to shorthand that. And what we're going to do is we are going to store all 4 of these text objects right here. Actually, let me think for a second. We might want to do all 5. No, let me think. I'll think about it. I know at least we're going to store all 4 of these stats, these ones that are going to display stats, so that when it comes to writing our information, it's going to go a lot faster. Because notice the HP text is for all of the stats, and we don't have an individual text object for each one. That would get really cumbersome trying to do, and that wouldn't be, that's not very efficient. So I'll show you how this is going to work later, but just note that what this array for is for this. And we won't include the name array. We're just going to do it for these 4 here. I think it's going to work out better that way anyway. So that's going to be our text array. And we'll call it text array, and it's just going to be a 1D array that holds 4 elements. And so all of these are actually going to be parallel arrays to each other. And it's really interesting how this ends up working out. And we can diagram that out later and show how these connect. Okay, I think I got all of them now. So we can talk a little about what events we need and what functions we need and all that kind of stuff. So we do need a start. We're not going to need an update though, since we're not doing anything in real time. We're not doing any kind of click events. We're not looking for any button pushes on the keyboard. So we can just do our start. But what we need to do in our start is we need to update our text on the screen. I have a bunch of filler text, and this is a good method to go about is, I need to make sure my text boxes are the correct size. So I have all these X's in there just to make sure that I have enough it's big enough. Like we're not going to disappear with that, and it lines up nicely. So we're going to need to update all this text to get all those X's out of there, because that's not really a good, good way to do that. We wouldn't want to, if you're using this program yourself, you wouldn't want to see that and see a bunch of X's. That'd be really weird. So we're going to update our text. We also need to set our counter to 0 because we haven't entered anything yet. So we'll set counter to 0. And we're going to have to set up our text array, because we're going to have to read in those text elements and throw them in that array. So we have to set up text array. And let's see, I think that's good. I think that's all we have to do. Again, since we're kind of diagramming this out first, we can always go back and adjust this if we need to. So what's next? We have our 2 button click events. We might as well start with that. And we'll do it's a public void on submit. Button click. And we have our, and I might need to make this document bigger. Just scroll down. we have our on, it's another public void, on generate, and I'm going to shorthand that, button click. And we can figure out what we're going to do in those. So what happens when we click that submit button? The first thing we need to do is we need to read in that input field. What do we do after we read it in? Well, we need to make sure that we check the input. Because if it's bad input, we are done. We need to tell the player that their input is bad and tell them what's wrong with it. And if they have bad input, then we don't really need to deal with this anymore. Next, we will, if it's good input, we need to, add the name to the name array. I'm going to shorthand that. And if we add that to the name array, afterwards we want to update that name array. I'm sorry, the name text on the screen, because we'd want the user to see that they did input the name and now it's up there. The last thing we're going to have to do on the on submit button click is then raise our counter, because we added one. And after we raise the counter, we probably, and I'll put this up here, we need to check if at 6. So we need to check to see if that was the 6th one. Because if it's the 6th one, if is, turn off button. So that we do that. Let me make a little note here. So we check input. If good, let's make a little note of that. So we're only going to do this if it's good. We'll do all that. It's not too bad. We've done all that kind of stuff before. And let's talk a little bit about the on generate button click. So what happens when that's clicked? What we need to do is we need to we are going to generate random numbers into the, what do we call that one? The stat array. Come on. For how many characters we have. So we don't want to generate stats for players we don't have. After we generate those, we want to update our text array text with new info. And that's it. We don't have to really do anything else with that. So, there's a lot going on with just a couple sentences. And there's a lot of things that we're going to be doing probably multiple times, or what you could consider like, wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for, coding directly into our events. So what we're probably going to want to do is split this up into some functions. So for instance, we update text a couple times. When we hit start, we need to update the text for the name text and the stat text. And each time this goes through, we're going to have to update that name text. When this goes through, we have to do the stat text. So that would be an easy one to break off into its own function. So why don't we, let me make this document a little bit bigger so that we can write this below. Let's go to canvas size. And now I have some space to write these new functions. So new functions that we need. We need a print names function, and that's just going to be a private void, and we'll call it print names. And what this is going to do is read the names from name array and display in name text. Easy enough. And then we'll have a private void for our, we'll call it print stats. And this will read stat numbers from stat array and display in text array texts, because that's what's holding like our 4 different stats. So that's all that's going to do. We could come up here and we can kind of tweak this a little bit now, because rather than update text, oops, that is not, let's do it the right way. Oops, I am in the wrong. There we go. Rather than update text, we can say why is that so big? Print names. Let me turn this off. And print stats. Because those are our 2 functions. We can then come over here and just say when we on submit button click, we just need to call print names. And then on the on generate button click, we're just going to call print stats. Come on. So what else can we break into stuff? One thing I might also break into something would be this chunk right here, this check input stuff, because we could do this as a bool returning function where we're going to read it in. If it's good, we'll send true so that it does stuff, and if it keeps going. And otherwise we will give it an error message. So let's, down here I'm going to define, it's going to be private, but it's going to return a bool. And we're going to call it check input. So what does check input do? We're going to read in the input field if good, return true. If bad, we are going to update error text. And we are going to return false. Something else we probably want to do in here that I'm thinking about it is not just return true, but we're probably going to also update error text. Let me erase this and get some more space. Let me zoom in a little bit. Because what happens, because this is, this is a good example of like, we're thinking about things. What happens if they do something bad and you give them an error message, and next time they do something good, the error message is going to stay there. So we need to make sure that we actually update that to clear it out if they enter in the correct thing. So update the error text and return true. So with that, we can just call up here, where is it, on submit button click. We can kind of erase all this. We're gonna kind of rewrite this. We'll say if what do I call it? Check input. So if we get a true, so if check input returns true, we're going to do all this stuff. And let me kind of erase it a little bit, make it a little bit cleaner. If check input is true, we're going to add name. To the array. We're going to call print name, or print names. And then we will raise our counter. And then we have something else we need to do. And this would be another good thing that we could break off into our own function. It's this right here, where we're checking to see if we've entered 6 players yet. So we can actually, I'm going to erase this because I'm going to make this into a function because that makes the most sense. It's a very specific thing. And we'll name this function check char count. And this is just going to check to see if we've reached 6. If we've reached 6, we're going to turn off that button. So I'm going to come down here. It's private void, because we don't need to return anything, called check char count. Probably should put those there. That's fine. And all this does is if counter is equal to 6, turn off the submit button. That's it. That's all it does. But it's nice to kind of break this off into its own thing since it does a very specific task. Okay, what else can we do? So that's good. What about our on-gen button click? So it's going to generate that into a stat array for how many characters we have and then print the stats. Honestly, we probably should make this a function too, because that's going to be a little bit of code that we shouldn't have all of that in there. Because that's just not good programming to have a bunch of code in our button click events. It's better to break it off into functions. And this will be good practice. So let's erase that. And we'll call this, we'll just call that new function generate stats. We don't need to send it anything, but we will kind of talk about that down here. It's going to be a private void called generate stats. And it's more or less going to just say here what we had up there. For the number of characters, fill the stat array. And that's all we have to do with that one. So it's its own nice little chunk. And I think that is all I can think of as far as this stuff goes. But I'm going to keep this open. But now we have the ability, so that since we kind of got the skeleton of our code, that we can sketch out the whole thing in Visual Studio. And this will be a good opportunity to get all of our stuff in place so that we can go back in and then fill in the details. Kind of think, you know, it's a skeleton or like a sketch. When you're doing like a nice drawing, you don't go in and do the details first. You do a basic sketch to get a good outline of it or like a good skeleton of it. And then you go back in afterwards once you are satisfied with that and fill in the actual details with this. So let's go to Visual Studio. And if we remember, we kind of remember our stuff. The first thing we should probably add is our, you know, we're going to just start our way at the top and work our way down. So I'm going to type in up here using Unity Engine.ui. And I'm going to type in all of my class level variables. So I'm going to come down here. And for my public ones, why don't we work with some headers with this? Since we're going to have a lot of different UI elements that we need to do public, it's just a good habit to get into of using headers. So up here at the top, we'll say header, and we will have one for text objects. We will do our public text. What do we need? Our name text, public text, our HP text, public text, MP text, public text, ST text for strength, and public text, DF text for defense. One last one we do need to put in here is our public text for our error text. And I think that's it. I think that's all the ones we have to manipulate in there. Do our header for our input fields. Public input field, name input, and a header for our buttons. I know it seems silly that we only have one of each, but trust me, just you don't want a big old block of things that you need to do. It'll look really nice. Public button, submit button. I think that's it. And we can always go back and add some more, but I think that's it for our public class level variables. If we go back and look at our notes about our other stuff, what do we need? All the way at the top. Got those. We need our arrays, and then we need our counter. So let's define those two. So we have our private string array. We're going to call it name array. Let's go to new string, and we have 6 because we can have up to 6 players. We have our private int, and this is going to be a 2D array, so we can't forget to mark that this is 2D, called stat array. And this is equal to new int, and we need to have 6 rows, 4 columns. The other one that we need is our private text array. We'll call it text array. And we have 4 with that. And I do want to take the opportunity to kind of show how these are all kind of parallel with each other. So I'm going to go over to Photoshop again real quick. And let me hide this and just make a new layer so I can show this. And the way that these are going to be parallel to each other. So let me just kind of draw out the arrays first. And I'm going to kind of draw them in a way so that they kind of match this a little bit better. So my name array, I'm actually going to draw like this. And let's make sure that we get half, our 6 in here. And this is our name. And we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is, we could think of as our X, going down this way. We then have our stat array, which is going to have 6 rows, 4 columns. So let me draw those like this. And we will make sure that these line up nice.
Oh, I found it.
Like that. And this is our stat array. And we can think of this, still as our X. And this is our Y. So we'll do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we have our columns of 0, 1, 2, and 3. And this is a pretty easy, parallel array to see the correlation, where this one is lined up with this one with this one. These all line up. So when we get the name in name array slot 0, element 0, it lines up with stat array slot 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. Name in element 1 is lined up with stat array 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, No, I'm doing this backwards, sorry. Name in element 1 lines up with stat 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. That's why, again, good to diagram this out so you can get this straight in your head. Name 2, 2, 0, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3. So where does that text array come in? Because it's actually parallel to the stat array. And let me kind of draw this out. I'm going to write the text array over here, but our text array is only 4 big. It has 4 elements in it. So let me draw this real quick. And this is our text at element 0, 1, 2, and 3. Oops, not E, 3. And element 0 is going to hold that HP text. This one's going to hold the MP text. This one's going to hold that strength text. And this one's going to hold that defense text. And we're going to use this so that we can easily use looping to go in and update our text. It's going to be really cool how this works. But how is this parallel? So this is still, for us would be considered our x-axis. This one aligns up though with this array's y-axis. So, this HP, this is where we're holding all of the HP stats is in this column. The MP1 is all being stored in this column. This one's all being stored in this column, and this one's all being stored in this column. So what we're going to do is when it's time to get this going, when we need to update this, we know that 0 is going to correlate with, its y is equal to 0. So when we need to get all the hit points, we are going to just use a for loop in here, but we're always going to know that y is going to be 0. So we're going to do, to get all the HP, we need to go to stat 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4, 0, 5. To get the MP stats, it's always going to be 1. So we know we're going to have to access that by going to 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, and 5, 1. The 2 would be 0, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5, 2, and same for the last one. So these hook up in a really interesting way, but these are all, this is parallel to this. This one is parallel to this one. We don't really have much correlation between these two though, because, the HP text, we really don't care. We can't get much information between those two. But since these are kind of flipped, we could even think of this one being drawn this way in a weird way. And if this kind of helps too when it comes to it, we could think of it this way. And if for the counter, if it really helps, as again, that you want to think of this as y. If this helps, you could think of it this way. And when we use our for loop, we can just use a counter of y for this. But keep in mind, even though we're saying it's y, it's not it's still a one-dimensional array. We're not going to be accessing it this way. It would just be like this. But, if this is another way to think of it, so that it fits in your head better, we could think of it like this, where it's just another way to kind of turn it around if you want to think about it spatially in your head. So, this kind of turned kind of lines up with those. Okay, with that said, let's go back to filling out the skeleton of our code. Get this up, pull this back over. And I think the last thing we had to do for this was we need to add that counter. Let me just make sure. Let me go back. Sorry. Let me turn off this layer so I can see this. So I think we just had our counter left. Yeah. So let's go back to here, and it's going to be a private int counter. So the next thing I want to do is I do want to put in all of my events and functions. And I know I don't need update. I'm going to need start. I'm not going to bother to code anything in start yet, because I do want to, I don't want to get any error messages as I go through. I just want to go through and define all of these that I decided that I needed on my scratch paper. So let me move these over here just so I make sure I spell them right. We're going to need a public void on submit button click. We're going to need a public void on generate button click. Oops, I am typing bad today. And then we need all of our functions we decided on. We need a private void called print names. We need a private void called print stats. We need, let's see, what else do we need? Private bool, because we're going to return a bool in our check input. And we do want to go ahead and make sure that we, I don't want to see this error, especially because we're going to go ahead and hook up our Unity stuff. So we're going to make a bool in here called to return and set that equal to true, and then just return to return. Just to get rid of that error. We don't want to deal with that right now. We'll come back in and code this later. We'll then have a private void check char count. And the last one, excuse me, is private void generate stats. The last thing I'm going to do before I head on over to Unity is I can kind of fill out some information in here, such as if we go up to start, we know we're going to call print names. We're going to call print stats. We are going to set our counter to 0, and that's an easy one to do. And we're going to set up the text array. And we can code that in real quick because that's, you know, we want to make sure that this functions correctly too. So to set that up, we are going to say text array 0. So the first slot in it is going to be equal to that HP text. This will kind of also reinforce what I just did in Photoshop with explaining how these line up. And you do have to do them in this order. Don't like pick your own order. Array 1, or element 1 is going to be MP text. Text array 2 will be equal to ST text. And text array 3 is going to be equal to our DF text. And with that, you know, if you have your scratch paper, We could even go ahead and say, let's go back here. This is done. We are done with our start. I think we're also done with this. We're done with all of that. And we can kind of check things off as we go to make sure that we don't forget anything. And that's probably pretty good. I don't really want to go in and fill in anything else, but since our start was pretty easy and it's, we're just taking the opportunity to fill that in. But let's save this. I'm in the wrong screen. Let's try this again. Let's save this. Let's go over to Unity, and let's set this all up. Not sure why I'm getting that error. That's kind of weird. Okay, so let's go where I put my text. So we have a lot of little things to fill in. Luckily, I was smart and named things well, so my name text is just called name text. Names text, it's fine. Close enough. HP text. MP text. Strength text. Defense text. And error text. Let's do all these too. Name input and our submit button. All right, so that's all set up. Let's get our buttons hooked up and we should be good to go. We should be able to then hit play, and I mean, nothing's gonna happen, but at least we can make sure that we don't have any errors so far. So let's do this. My game controller. Submit button click, and let's put this in here, and on gen button click. Okay, I think that is it for setting up this stuff. So let me hit play just to make sure I'm not getting any errors. And I am not getting any errors, which is good. And let's turn that off. Okay, we are at a good spot. So make sure that you do get caught up. If you need to pause it, obviously pause it. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start blocking this out so that we can finish up the script. I think the first thing we need to do with this is we need to do our prints. Since that's like the first thing that we run is these print names and print stats, why don't we go ahead and fill those out? So print names, what print names is going to do is it's going to print what's being stored in our name array. And what we can do with this is going to be really easy. We can even use a for each loop. We are going to first get our string that we're going to concatenate all those names on. And I'll call it toPrint, so they equal to nothing. And then we are going to step through our name array. We're going to say for each string, and I'll call it name, I guess, because that's what it is, in name array. What do we want to do with that? We want to say toPrint is equal to toPrint plus name plus, and this is an important one, we don't want to forget, we want to make sure that we are doing a carriage return so that when we add the next name onto it, the next time around, it'll be on a new line. After we're done with that, we just need to then update that actual text in Unity, which is our name text dot text is equal to our toPrint string. All right, so it would be nice to test this out, and it's going to run when we start, but there's nothing in there. So what we probably want to do is let's just go down to on submit button click. Actually, I guess we'd have to fill it out first, but I guess we could just make sure that this runs. I don't want to, we'll do that on submit button click next with this one, I think. So let's save this and let's just make sure that our text is updating. You know, we haven't done anything with this yet. We'll tackle this like in the second half. We'll just focus on adding our names and doing all that first. So let's hit play. And it is clearing it out because when we, you know, initialize that array, there's nothing in it. That's name array, so there's nothing to show. So we're good to go. We know that it's reading it correctly. We're writing to it correctly. We don't have any errors, so we can move on with that one. Because that's all we need to do to print those names. We're done. So the next thing I want to tackle is this on submit button click. So let's tackle that on submit button click button event. And if we go back to our notes, okay, let's take the opportunity though. This is always the best part, is when we can check off when we're done with something. So we did that. We can work on this. So what we want to do, we want to call, you know, if, and we'll call that check input, stuff's going to happen. So why don't we go ahead and do that? We'll say it, we'll code this one out. So if check input, if that returns true, we are going to add that name to our array. So how do we do that? We just need to make sure that we are keeping track of which player we're adding, this one. So we'll just say name array at our current counter is equal to that input that we are using, that name input dot text. So once we have it added, we want to make sure that we are printing our names. We want to make sure that we raise our counter. We want to, and I did forget to note this, I'm just kind of thinking about it now as I'm going through, we probably want to clear out that name input, right? Like we did with the gradebook. We're going to say name input.text is equal to nothing, clear it out for the user, be nice to them. And then the last thing we need to do is check char count to make sure that we are not at 6. If we're at 6, we got to turn off our button. That's it for the on submit button click. We are done. We can actually test this now. We got to be very careful since our we haven't done this part yet. We haven't checked or we haven't coded this. It's just returning true, and we are not turning off the button when we reach 6. But we can print our name. So why don't we take the opportunity to test this out? So let me save this. Come over here and let's see what happens. So let's enter a name. It has to be 6. Amberts. Close enough. I'll hit submit. Didn't display it. So we're having a problem. Why didn't it display? I must have missed something. Let's go back and look at our code. This is a good opportunity to make sure that, you know, let's troubleshoot this together. So we are returning true with check input. What did I mess up here? Let's make sure that we are actually getting stats. So we're going to add a print here where we're going to just print out whatever's in toString. And let's see, print toString. Doesn't it like that? Oh, I'm sorry. It's called to print. That's why. And let's see if this is working. We're going to kind of work our way backwards and see if we can find our problem. I'm sure it's going to be something really silly, but this is a good opportunity to do how to debug this. So let's try this. Hit play and we get nothing. And that's what we expect because that cleared it out as we put this in. So let me enter my name. Hit submit. And we didn't get anything. So we can tell that it is not going all the way to that end. So it's never actually calling print stats. So I'm going to comment this out real quick. I'm not going to delete it in case I need to turn it on. But let's go up and work our way back. Why don't we check to see if the submit button's working? That's another good place to start. So I'm going to make a print and just say submit button clicked. And let's see if this registers. And let's see what we get. So we are getting a submit button click. So we know that the code is hitting there. Let's kind of go in a little bit farther then. I'm going to comment this out. We'll put one in right here. We'll print input checked. Because let's see if we're getting inside of this if statement. Let's see where this is going. And we will go back to Unity. Hit play. And it is checking the input. So we are getting inside that if statement. So with that said, let's kind of work our way down and we can do this. Let's try printing we'll print what is currently in that name array. Maybe that's where the problem is. Maybe there's something wrong with this. Let's see. This is why it's really good to do it this way so that we can find these problems early and fix them. And it is being stored correctly in the array. That means our problem might be actually with the print names. Let's take a look at that print names. What is going on with it? I found the problem, and it is the silliest problem in the world. Look where I accidentally put it in. I accidentally wrote my code in print names. I'm sorry, print stats. Okay. Let's just paste this in here. Hopefully you caught that. Maybe you're yelling at me at the video of like, what are you doing? Sorry. But this was a good way to kind of work our way through and find our errors. All right, let's try this again. I'm pretty sure this is going to work now. Let's see. Amberts. There we go. Let's see, Gimel. Variab. And we see that as we submit it, it is adding to it. So we should be pretty good to go with this. That was a crazy error, and I think I just didn't have enough coffee this morning as I started these videos. Hopefully you haven't, if you saw what time I started these at, it was pretty early in the morning. Sorry, but again, it's always a good way to practice doing some errors. Hopefully you just caught that right away and didn't actually have to, Okay. All right, let's move forward. So where are we at? Let's use our Photoshop document. This is a good way to make sure we stay on task. So we have our on submit button on submit button check done. I think the one that would make the most sense to do next is our check input, since we're kind of just like working our way down with the workflow that students would encounter, or users would encounter. So let's talk about check input. Let's go back and remember what we're going to do with that. This is where we return a bool, where we're going to read in to see if the user put in a good name or not. And if it's good, we're going to return it and return true. If it's bad, we're going to tell the user why it's bad and return false. All right, let's go. Check input. And this is where we already have, you know, this to return, and that's fine because we can just utilize that in our code. So all we need to do is let's read in that input field. We'll call it string name is equal to name input dot text. If name dot length, because we can do this to strings where it's going to return how many characters are in that string, is equal to 6. If that's true, we have a good name. So we want to make sure that our error text dot text is set to nothing because there's no error, and we'll return true. Or we'll make sure that to return is equal to true because we're returning at the very end of everything. But you know, just a good habit, we want to doubly extra make sure that to return is still true. If it is not 6, we have a problem. And what I would recommend is, you know, we could be a little bit nice with telling the user what the problem is. It's not that difficult to do. We can just have another if statement in here and say if name.length is greater than 6, have error text.text say error name more than 6 characters. Else if the name dot length is less than 6, we can say error text.text is equal to error name must be, or we could say error name too short must be 6 characters. I might need to make my text object a little bit bigger to fit that, but that's a little bit of variation, so we know it's obvious if too big or too small. The last thing we want to do, you know, underneath this is we need to make sure that to return is set to false because we have a bad input. We want to stop that. We want to stop this. We don't want to do any of that. And that should be it for check input. So let's go ahead and test this again. Sorry about that, but I did put it in correctly this time. I want to make this bigger too. I think it's going to be longer than what I have. All right, let's try it. What happens if we just click submit with nothing in there? Ooh, error, name too short, must be 6 characters, so that works. What happens if we put too many in there, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? That's definitely more than 6 characters. Error, name more than 6 characters. So we definitely have both. So let's put in a good name. Amberts Why isn't that taken now? What did I do? I'm just having... What did I screw up? Screwed up something. I went ahead and paused the video and checked, and I can't find any problems. It's actually working correctly now. Maybe I was just typing in a bad name. Let's double check that. So we'll type in, you know, name of 1, too short. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, too long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, submit, and it submits it. So we are good to go. All right, so let's go back. We are done with check inputs. So we're, you know, we don't have too much more to do. We are done dealing with those names. Oh, sorry. Check character counter. Check char count. Let's do that one real quick because this is easy. It's just if our counter is up to 6, we're going to turn off our submit button. So let's go back here. Code this in real quick. If counter, we'll just say greater than or equal to 6. You know, equal to isn't necessarily the greatest because what happens if somewhere else in the code it messes up and it makes it 7, we still would want to turn it off. So if it is greater than or equal to 6, we just need to, if it's greater than 6, call our button, submit button dot interactable is equal to false. And I know like we really should never encounter this, but let's just make sure. We'll just do an else. If it's, you know, less than 6, submit button dot interactable is equal to true. It's just a good habit to get into that we're taking care of both cases. Let's check this out now. We'll go back to, let's double check, let's look at everything. Okay, so that's good. We do raise it and then we check it afterwards. And that's the way that we want it since elements start at 0. All right. I'm gonna be lazy and just do, let's see, 1. I should probably count this as I go. And this should be our last one. Oh. And notice now that I have those in, this button we can't click on anymore. So we can't accidentally overload our stuff. Good, we're just getting there. We are done with our name stuff. Let's, check this off. And let's work now on our last 2. We have generate stats and we have print stats. And our on generate button click. Let's code this real fast because it's literally 2 lines of code. And then we'll work on printing our stats and then we'll work on generating the stats. The reason I'm going with that first is because we want to be able to check to see if our generating stats is working, and we can only do that by printing our stats. So on gen button click, we're first going to call generate stats, then we'll call print stats. The other thing I just kind of saw as we were playing, in my start, I need to make sure that I set that error text.text equal to nothing because I don't want to see all those X's. I just forgot to add that in. Okay, let's check this off. And let's talk about print stats. So this is the interesting one where we are going to deal with the array, you know, the 2D array and that text array, and how that we have them parallel, but it's more like on the Y value of the 2D array with that. So we're going to have to read the stats from the stat array and display them in the text array. So I just want to kind of make sure that this is working, and we're going to kind of do this in two little pieces. First, let's just get it working. And then we are going to alter it so that it only displays for the number of characters that we currently have. So over here, what we want to do is, you know, ultimately all of those strings are, all of those text objects are just going to be strings. So I'm going to start with a string called toPrint and set that equal to nothing. And I am going to make a for loop, and I'm going to use Y, so that this kind of might make a little bit more sense in your head. Wait, no, let me think. Let me look at my Photoshop document again. This is why this is really handy. What do we actually want to step through? So all of the Y's, yeah, we want to start with Y, and then we're going to have an inside nested there an X to step through all of this. Yes, that's the way that we want to go. So for int Y is equal to 0, Y is less than stat array dot get length for the Y one, Y plus plus. And what we want to have happen is that we want to go in and do our for int X. X is less than stat array dot get length 0 X plus plus. And let's see. Okay, so we just want to read through and concatenate everything in the Y column, you know, into this toPrint. So we're going to say toPrint is equal to toPrint plus stat array X comma Y. And this is going to cycle through that entire Y column. Excuse me. Once we're done concatenating that entire Y column, we're going to say text array at whatever column we're on. We're going to look at the dot text of that text, you know, we're going to be pulling out that text object in that current spot. We want to manipulate that, the actual text in that, and set that equal to our toPrint. And then when we're done, we're going to set toPrint back equal to nothing, because we're going to utilize that again when the next iteration of the Y. And that should be it. And this should just, when we hit start, give us a big column of, like a big display of zeros in there, since there's nothing, we haven't generated our stats yet. So let's go to here. And we didn't get anything. Null reference exception. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. What did I forget? Line 77. I see the issue. We just have to go back up to the start and move print stats below all this. Since it's trying to access that text array, we didn't set up the text array yet, so sorry. Let's make sure we fix that. And let's try again. Let's go back to Unity. And we get them. What happened? This is an interesting problem. So we have 4. Oh, I know. I'm getting sloppy. We need to add plus n on the end so that it does a carriage return. Let's see how this goes. We'll get it. There we go, perfect. So now that we know that we are printing correctly, let's take into account that we only want to do this for how many players we currently have. And that gets controlled by if we kind of go back to our Photoshop document real quick, you know, this. It is controlled by our X. Because, you know, the Y is the columns, the X is actually how many rows that we have. So rather than doing in here, you know, do it for as many of that get length for there, we can just change this to counter. So if our counter starts at 0, we haven't entered any people in, it shouldn't run. When we have 1 in there, it'll run 1 time. And that's the only change you need to make in here to make sure that it only runs when we have players in there. Let's save and double check. And we're not getting anything yet, and that's fine. That's exactly what we want. We don't have any errors either. So let's actually test something. We should be able to test, since we hooked up our button and did our generate stats, even though generate stats doesn't do anything. If we enter a player, let's see if this works. Yes. If we add another one, it's, you know, it's going through and it's only doing the stats for the amount of players that we have. That works really well. Okay, we are in the home stretch. We only have 1 more to go. So let's go back in and check this off. We need to generate our stats. And for this, we just need to use a random number generator to fill in the stats for as many people that we have. And let's go to, where is that? Down here. Let's close up some of these. Let's make it a little bit easier to see. So we want to only generate stats for our counter. You know, we're going to use that as part of it. But we want to make sure that we are stepping through this correctly. So we only want to, you know, it's going to be sort of the opposite of what we did before, because we want to fill this row by row. So if we have a row, we want to go through all of it. So we're going to do this kind of the opposite, where we're going to do of last time, but this is going to be similar to how we did it in earlier practice examples. So we'll do for int x is equal to 0, x is less than counter, because we only want to do it for however many we have, x plus plus. We'll then put in our nested for int y is equal to 0, y is less than stat array dot get length 1. Oops, I'm messing this up. Y plus plus. And all we want to do is, for that x and y, we want to say stat array at that x and y is equal to random.range. And our range, we're going to do 10 to 100 because we want them to be all 2-digit numbers. It's going to line up really nice. We'll say that is the limit that our designers gave us. And that's it. That's all we have to do, since this will take care of stopping when we are through with, we only do for the number of players, and we'll just get all those columns. Because we're not worried about displaying it. We do that in our print stats. So we just need to fill that stat array. All right, let's save it and test this. And this should be, hopefully, if there's no errors, our last bit. So let's hit play. It all clears out. We enter our name. We'll enter the next one. And let's see what happens. Let's hit generate stats. And we do get stats just for those players. So let's go in and fill in the rest of the players. We'll do the last one. And we'll hit generate stats. And we get stats for all the players. Notice every single time we do click generate stats, it does randomize those numbers. You don't keep them, even if you enter only a couple and then generate. If you enter more and hit it, those other players are going to get random again. And we are finally done with this one. I know this one was a little bit intense, but we did a lot of really important concepts in here that are going to be very useful on your project. So make sure you do work through all of this and understand what we did, because it's going to be, like I said, really useful for future stuff.